Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Myth Salon. My name is Dana White, and today we have an arguably special Myth Salon. It's on money, on the myth of money. We're privileged to have Tad Crawford with us, brought courtesy of Connie Zweig, one of our longtime supporters in the Myth Salon. I really don't know how to quite begin this Myth Salon. We generally talk a little bit about how difficult the cultural circumstances are with COVID, but it seems that everywhere we turn now, we're having profound difficulties. And so I wanted to read a short poem before the singing bowl, not after, because it just seemed more appropriate. It's called Love and Hope. We have been prisoners for weeks now, riches of time and connectedness held hostage by a tyrant who swept in after the cape of COVID death had been folded away and almost forgotten. We have been prisoners, passing messages of love and hope among ourselves as we struggle to make meaning of the senselessness of tyranny. There are no good answers, only endless rivers of life's injustices. And then comes lunacy from the bowels of a Brooklyn subway station. Once again, we are prisoners whose freedom depends upon blowing breath upon the shards of love and hope that lie among the rubble of destruction to keep one another alive. So let's have a moment of silence as we begin the Myth Salon. Let's think about Ukraine. Let's think about the poor people in Brooklyn. My own son used to live in Brooklyn. I can picture the terror that must have felt in the subway as this fellow went berserk and it's just senseless. I have no words for it. So where words fail, let's have silence. Okay. It's always a joy to be together, having the Myth Salon. What a community we have. I'm so grateful for my good friend and colleague, Will Lynn. We started this more than 5 years ago. Now we're doing it online and we're reaching out, and I want to show this book that brought Robert Sardello in. I was cleaning my library out, and this thing is 40 years old. Okay, Will, take it away.
Well, thanks, Dana. And gosh, I was thinking about when we started, and for those who may not know, we started our very first Myth Salon was in Dana's house. And through all of this, it's kind of been like, well, waiting to get back to Dana's house. And now Dana's moving. And so we're going to have to figure out how to feel and carry that on. But that first night that we were getting together, the first event, the conversation was meant to be, okay, so we're going to have a woman president for the first time. What does that mean? That was our first Myth Salon. And then the next Myth Salon was, okay, so Donald Trump is our president now. What does that mean? And now, as everything has continued to unfold since that time, since we almost can look at those as inciting incidents for when the world seemed to take a path unexpected, even by those who I think voted for Donald Trump, a path unexpected ever since that time. And our Myth Salons have been entangled exactly with whatever has been going on these last several years. And now we find ourselves talking about money, which is perhaps one of the deepest roots to everything that we've been talking about and everything that's been going on. And for me, this is a really exciting conversation to have. I feel incredibly blessed to be able to hear from who's with us tonight, and to have conversation partners. This is, for me, my first myth. I don't know, for those of you who don't know this about me, my dad, godfather, and uncle, all Harvard Business School graduates. I grew up on the case studies. That was my dinner conversation, was Harvard Business School case studies. And I was sure that would be my life. My one grandfather invented the automobile lease, and his uncle invented the self-service store. Being a business person was like, built in. Every single man in my family did that for generations. So it was my first myth. And at this point, it has become a myth, and it's become something distant and something that I try to relate to in completely different ways. So it's in some ways a challenging conversation for me, and also a homecoming conversation for me. So I'm excited to have that. So thank you for the selfish indulgence expressing why it's so meaningful and important to me. You all know Dana. Dana's a great friend and has been an amazing leader for this community this whole time. He's a host of this Myth Salon, a producer, publisher, and a contributing member of Pacifica's Myth faculty. My name is Will Lynn, moderator of the Myth Salon. I chair the General Education Department at Husson College, which is a film and performing arts college in downtown Los Angeles. Have also been co-producing and moderating this Myth Salon for 5 years. And you can see those events, everything we've done on mythhouse.org. New to this Myth Salon is Dr. Brian Muldoon, who received his PhD in clinical psychology from the New School for Social Research. He has 40 years working in private practice with a specialty in addiction and gerontology, and teaches psychology and statistics at Fordham University and the New School. He's interested in psycholinguistics and speaks French, Spanish, and Italian. Dr. Robert Sardello is co-founder and co-director of the School of Spiritual Psychology, which began in 1992, and co-editor of Golden Stone Press. He's author of 6 books. He's an independent teacher and scholar. He is a co-founder and founding fellow of the Dallas Institute of Humanities and Culture, which, for those of you who don't know, has been a very important pillar in a much larger delocalized community and conversation for those of us interested in myth and storytelling in the humanities. His main emphasis has been to develop theoretical and practical approaches to perceiving and being in right relation with the soul of the world, showing that humans are pulled from the time stream, from the future, rather than pushed from the past, and developing the interior consciousness of the heart. Dr. Dennis Patrick Slattery, who many of you know, is a distinguished emeritus professor in the Mythological Studies program of Pacifica Graduate Institute. He is the author, co-author, editor of, or co-editor of 30 volumes, including 7 volumes of poetry and 1 novel. His latest collection of essays is The Way of Myth, Stories, Subtle Wisdom. His paintings, poetry, blogs, book titles, and, by the way, upcoming event in Santa Fe. Is that right, Dennis?
Yes, Will.
Santa Fe. And what were the dates on this event?
May 10th, 11th, and 12, 13, 14 of May.
So check out DennisPatrickSlattery.com, and we'll send some more information on that as well for everybody who's been listening to him in these Myth Salons and would like some time with Dennis.
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I would wish I could be there. Dr. Connie Zweig is a retired therapist, writer, and shadow expert, a topic on which she has written several volumes, including her most recent bestseller, The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul, which won both the 2021 American Book Fest Award and the 2021 Best Indie Book Award for Best in Spiritual Nonfiction. Her work at Pacifica is also worth paying attention to on these aging conferences that she'll continue to tell us more about. Tad Crawford is our speaker tonight, is the publisher of Allworth Press in New York City, Citadel, I guess, is a graduate of Tufts University in economics and Columbia Law School. He's the author of The Secret Life of Money and has lectured on the psychology, mythology, and symbolism of money at such venues as the New York Open Center, Wainwright House, and the Analytical Psychology Club of New York. He's the author of 2 novels, A Floating Life and The Money Mentor, A Tale of Finding Financial Freedom, and more than a dozen nonfiction books on the business lives of artists and writers. He lives in New York City, perhaps the capital of capitalism. Thanks for being with us, Tad. I'm looking forward to you taking it away, and we'll all join you in a little bit.
Great. Thank you very much, Will. I'd like to thank Will and Dana for having me, and I'm honored to be with such a distinguished panel. Connie, who was present for the birth of The Secret Life of Money, and Robert, who has written on the topic of money. So I'm very happy to be addressing you all tonight. I wanted to just mention why I wrote the book. When I was starting a business, I found that I was quite worried about money. And I worried and worried and worried, and I didn't have enough of it, that's for sure. I see now it was undercapitalized. But at some point, I started to think, what am I worrying about? And then I thought, I'm worrying about money. And then, well, what is money? And this led on to a series of fascinating researches that eventually became The Secret Life of Money. So I want to just start off with a story from Aesop. Once there was a man who prayed to a wooden idol for money. And he prayed, but the wooden idol wouldn't give him any money. Finally, he became enraged and he struck the wooden idol against the wall, and from its head, gold poured out. So what I take away from the story is that if you change your attitude about money, something new may happen and riches may be revealed, whether riches of finance or riches of inner potentials. I want to discuss first the many forms money can take and show that money really is a creation of the human imagination. In the 19th century on the island of Yap in the South Pacific, the islanders would go about 400 miles through the ocean to an island where they could quarry very large stones. They would quarry them in a circular form and they would make a hole in the middle of them. These stones were called fei, and they would then bring them back, sometimes on unruly seas, to the Isle of Yap, where they would be money. And people would own them, and they would endow the wealth of this family or that family. But there's some interesting incidents that happened with this money. For one thing, the stones were so large that it was very difficult to move them. To move them, you had to have many men put a log through the center of the stone and then shoulder the money to carry it from place to place. So after a while, they said, well, that big stone, we're just going to leave that in somebody's yard, even if they've transferred the ownership of it. We'll just know that those people don't have the money anymore and a different family is wealthy. Then this got taken another step, because as one of the boats was coming back from the island where they quarried the money, there was a violent storm and they had to let go of the raft that had the money on it, and it sank to the bottom of the Pacific. Nonetheless, several generations later, everyone on the island agreed that that family that would have owned the stone had it gotten to the island was wealthy because they had done nothing wrong, and therefore they still owned the stone, even though it was at the bottom of the Pacific. In 1898, the island of Yap became a German possession, and the Germans wanted the islanders to improve the paths around the island. So they asked the islanders to improve the paths, and the islanders did nothing, since they were happy with the paths. They had been shouldering their fei and carrying it around the island for generations. So the Germans thought of an ingenious stratagem. They sent a man around the island, and he simply painted a black cross on each of the fei, and then told the islanders that this black cross meant the fei were no longer money. Now, of course, it would have been possible to simply say, well, something else will be money. But the islanders were used to having the fei be money, and they were quite upset about it, and they immediately set about improving the paths. And when they were finished, the Germans sent another man around who removed the black crosses from the stones and said now they were money again, and the islanders celebrated to have their money returned to them. So money is very much a creation of the human mind, whether it is or is not money, and has taken innumerable forms, starting long before the Christian era. Calorie shells were money in Asia and the Middle East, and also in Africa, or wampum in the United States. So I'm going to share my screen now just to show some of the different forms that money has taken. So this is on the Isle of Yap. This is to give you a sense of the dimensions of these stones, which could weigh as much as 2 tons. they were really huge, and quite a contrast to Bitcoin. Continuing down, we have calorie shells, which were valuable for centuries before any kind of what we would consider minted money existed. Likewise, in some places, they used dog's teeth as money. This is really amazing. On one island, they used bird feathers. Now, this assemblage of bird feathers represents 50 to 60,000 bird feathers. The amount of labor to create this object here is extraordinary. And this is money. And then other things that were money were dolphins' teeth, whales' teeth, boars' tusks. In Borneo, human skulls were money. And salt was used as money. And the Roman word for salt is salarium. And from that word comes our word salary. So the earliest coins were in China, and they were shaped like tiny agricultural tools. This was around 1200 BC. Then the early Greek coins came centuries later and tended to emphasize divinities. So I just want to show you that. And I think by emphasizing divinities, they gave credence to the money because the money was divinely backed, as our money says, "In God we trust." So let's just go down. And here is Demeter. And then on a different coin, we have her daughter Persephone, another fertility goddess. And then we suddenly have Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great was deified, but he was the first sort of human and god to get on a coin, after which just having ordinary rulers get on coins became much more common. So I think it's fair to say that money in all the various forms that it takes, from calorie shells to silver tetradrachmans, it's a vehicle of relationship and exchange. And I'm going to discuss the larger archetypal scenarios of relationship and exchange that I think give a divine luster to our money. But I wanted to point some things out that we're just basically unconscious of about money. The things I'm going to point out are just some of the things that we may not ever think of. The bill at the top is larger than the bill at the bottom. And the bill at the top was the size that money was up until 1929. And then, to save on the cost of paper, it was decided to make all the bills smaller, so they were made smaller. And you can also see that both of these bills say silver certificate. This means that if you took this bill to the mint, they would give you silver powder. And before 1965, I would actually take bills like this to the mint and get silver powder because as a young person, I was a coin collector. It says $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. Then if you go a little bit further, you see the next thing, it's not a silver certificate, it's a Federal Reserve note. And it doesn't say that you can go and get silver or any kind of precious metal for it, and that's because you can't. This is what we call fiat money, and it relies on our trust. If we trust that it has value, then it has value. And if we don't trust it, then it doesn't. But nothing is backing it up. There's no gold standard. There's no silver behind it. But it does want to remember Demeter and Persephone and Alexander as a deified entity, because it says, "In God we trust." And then we have the unfinished pyramid with 13 levels, which are the original 13 states, topped by the all-seeing eye. And it says, he has favored our undertaking. And the eagle on the other side, which is symbolic of the highest, to sort of the supreme power and union that the country aspired to. So this is all paper money. There's nothing precious behind it. And then we have note paper. This note paper, if I go down a little further, is made from recycled US currency. And there's more of this paper here than there is in a dollar bill. So why wouldn't this paper be worth more than a dollar bill? But it's not, because we don't trust this paper. We trust the dollar bill that says it's backed by the Federal Reserve. And here, just as a little aside, this is the kind of money, this is a $1 billion note that people in Asia have burned in honor of their ancestors for many, many, many years, centuries, I think would be fair to say. And this is an attempt to give to the ancestors in the spirit world something by which they can have gain the things that they need in that other realm. So the thought of money going to another realm leads us to the goddesses that were both were fertility goddesses like Demeter, and then also to the goddess of money called Moneta, who was a Roman fertility goddess, and money was minted in her temples. But before that, money also came out of Greek temples. And the architecture of the temples was something that banks in the 19th century and early 20th century then adopted to gain the kind of imprimatur of the divine favor that they hoped the money would be received with. But if you think of what gives value, you have to go back to much earlier rituals of exchange. If you think of Thanksgiving, for example, when we celebrate Thanksgiving, we're giving thanks for the abundance of nature which has been shared with us. And early peoples around the world sought a relationship with the divine bounty of nature. It might be in the form of a tribe in the Pacific Northwest catching the salmon, but taking the bones and burning the bones, or putting the bones back into the river where the fish had been caught, so that they would be re-enfleshed in the spirit world and then brought back again to feed the tribe. So for what we received from nature, we offered rituals, we offered sacrifices, we offered prayers. There was an attempt to make a circularity, to have the circulation that is required, and that money is a much later manifestation of. Money also circulates. So the Hopi dance, for example, where the dancers have rattlesnakes to bring the rain and to bring an abundant harvest. Or 2,000 years ago, the greater mysteries at Eleusis, the shrine sacred to Demeter, not too far from Athens, where the initiates would go through various, no one could speak of these rites on pain of death, so we don't know that much about them, but the initiates would be carried to Mount Olympus, where they would witness the marriage of Zeus and Demeter. And they would then hear of the birth of a sacred child and of an ear of corn in silence reaped, and then chant, ye for rain, and ki for giving birth. So this idea of the fertility of the rain and the birth, and of course rain is water and water also flows, led to these celebrations and thanksgivings at which the food was also shared. So we might call these love feasts. This was not something where I bought the meal at McDonald's, so I'm going to eat it. This was something where we're thankful for the bounty of nature, and we're going to share it among the tribe, the village, certainly the family. And these earliest sacrifices and prayers and rituals, they go back thousands upon thousands of years. So money is a very late invention and arrival in terms of reflecting this desire to circulate back and forth between the human and divine realm. Now, as temples were built, so this is sort of recent history, even though it's probably 25 or 100 or 3,000 years ago, as temples were built, wealth was brought to the temples for sacrifice. And to store the wealth, treasuries were built near the temples. At Delphi, for example, 20 treasuries lined the sacred way leading to the temple of Apollo. So this is the Parthenon. This is just a very beautiful example of Greek architecture, and with the pillars and its dominating view, another view of the Parthenon. I didn't use the temple of Apollo at Delphi because it's hardly anything left of it. And then this is the treasury of the Athenians on the sacred way at Delphi. So it was out of treasuries like this that wealth could return in the form, let's say, of coins to the human community. And later in Roman times came from the temple of Moneta. So I want to show you now how our bank architecture then mimicked these temples to give this sense of the sacred, although it might not be expressed that way, to the money and the bank's activity. So here's the Knickerbocker Trust, built around 1900. Here's the Bank of Montreal from the middle 19th century. Here's National City Bank, again from around 1900. And then here we have Demeter. So she is abundant in all things and knows only abundance as a fertility goddess. That was why her money was placed on some of the early Greek coins. Now, because we're speaking of what the divine will give us, we also know that there's winter, and there's a time of when we do not have the energies of spring or the fertility of Demeter. So it's a cyclic process, and it means that our life energy is engaged in this process of relating to what nature has given us, and also of trying to honor our commitments to the human community. Often we feel that we sacrifice our life in the form of time for money. One wonderful story by D.H. Lawrence is The Rocking Horse Winner, where a small boy of maybe 8 or 9 has a mother who always wants more. She always says there needs to be more money. There must be more money. And finally, the boy hears the walls of the house saying there must be more money. And he begins to ride his rocking horse. And when he rides his rocking horse in a kind of frenzy, he knows the names of the horses that will win the horse races. And he tells his uncle Oscar, and his uncle bets on the horses. And the boy then secretly controls this money and gives it to the mother. But no matter how much money he gives to the mother, the walls keep saying there must be more money. And this goes on until he rides the horse in such a frenzy that he gets the name of the winner, where the prize will be enormous, and then he dies. The effort is too much for him. So it's an example of the sacrifice that money may cause us to make. And if we look at rituals to ensure fertility, we see that many, many cultures had human sacrifice as an aspect of those rituals. So this is a life or death matter. If you think of the Aztec priests reaching into the chest to pull the pulsating heart of a victim and hold it up to the sky, then you see the profound seriousness of this life or death matter of fertility and production, or the Celts sacrificing prisoners every 5 years, again, for fertility. So I want to connect this because I think it has to do with a misapprehension about what money is and can be used for. There's another story from Aesop about the miller who loved gold. The miller loved gold so much that he took everything he owned and converted it into gold. And then he melted all of the gold down into one enormous piece and buried it in a field. And he felt immensely happy to have so much gold. But one night, a thief came, dug up the gold, and stole it. And the miller went lamenting to his neighbor and said, "They stole my treasure." And the neighbor must have been a very unkind person, because the neighbor said, "You never had any treasure. Just bury a stone in the hole and you'll be just as wealthy as you were before." This is a kind of interesting response from the neighbor, not sympathetic. But I think the point of it is that you must circulate money to good purposes. And money can be like food or love or any of the many other aspects of life energy that need to circulate, but it shouldn't be buried in the earth. I wanted to give an example of this with a story about a tribe in the Pacific Northwest. It's called The Punishment of the Stingy. And it was a very harsh winter, and the chief of the tribe has died. His son is not quite a man, and the village is eking out a very meager existence on mussels and roots. One of the hunters, Blue Jay, says they should go on a hunt, and all the hunters agree, and they pile into 2 canoes, but they won't let the chief's son go with them. They go out of sight, and they come to an island where they see sea lions, and they kill the sea lion. And then Blue Jay says, "Let's eat it here ourselves and not take it back to the village." And none of the hunters object. And only one of the hunters, Raven, tries to hide meat so that he could bring it back to the village. But Blue Jay finds this out and takes the meat from him. They feast, they gather mussels and take the mussels back to the village. And this is repeated a second day, a third day, a fourth day, and a fifth day. And on the fifth day, the chief's son can't accept it anymore. And he takes his bow and arrow and he goes and he shoots an eagle flying overhead, and he skins the eagle. And he puts on the eagle's skin and he flies to the island where he sees the men are feasting. And he flies 5 times around the island. And then Blue Jay, seeing him, throws him a piece of the meat, which the eagle takes. And then he flies back to the village and he tells the villagers what's happening. And he says to them, basically, this isn't acceptable. If they don't bring it back, then the bond of the women and the children and the men who left is broken. And therefore, he says that they should knock all of the houses in the village down, and they should, and he will put a plank on the backs of the women, and put grease from the meat on their hair, they will swim out to the island where the men are, swim around it 5 times, and at that point they will be transformed into killer whales, and they will never have to rely on the men for food again. And for the children, they are to fly to the island as seabirds, fly 5 times around the island, and then go on their way. And this is what happens. And the men who are on the island, seeing the orcas go 5 times around the island and the seabirds go 5 times around the island, feel that they've encountered evil spirits, and they fill the canoes with meat, and they rush back to the village, but it's too late. The village doesn't exist anymore. Only Raven, because he wanted to bring meat back, only Raven's house has been spared. And the men after that have to live on mussels. And the chief's son becomes a leader, and because he did what was right, he really wanted to maintain the proper social order. So one point here is that to come back with meat when you think something is wrong, that's giving from fear, and that's not giving from generosity. So in a sense, what the story illustrates is that those who fail to circulate lose what might have been circulated back to him. And I'm not talking, about money. I'm talking about love, relationship, all of the things that make the human experience worthwhile. Now, I didn't want to dwell on the Christmas Carol, but I do just want to go there briefly and mention that. So here's one image of a fertility figure, and then this is a banknote from a bank called Abundant Exchange. And you can see it's a fertility goddess, but interestingly enough, she also has the wings attributed to Hermes or Mercury that she's on a roll with. Okay, so here is some of the bank architecture. Interior, again, a fertility figure in the Bank of Montreal. And then here's a sharp break with the sort of temple architecture. This is manufacturers Hanover in 1953. And this is the beginning of fast money and the attendant rise of credit cards, which is something I'll talk about a little bit more later. And finally, we come to the Ghost of Christmas Present. And the Ghost of Christmas Present is certainly a fertility god. He transforms Scrooge's room into a perfect grove with holly, mistletoe, and ivy. His robe is green, his torch is like a plenty's horn or cornucopia. And he shows Scrooge human life in its richness. That is, Scrooge's employee, Bob Cratchit's family. He sees them happy even though they're poor. Or Scrooge's nephew, Fred, whom he has really refused to have a familial relationship with. So it's important, if we can, to decode through our money much earlier relationships of exchange, including divine exchange and the prayerful and respectful attitude toward those who have gone before us, and also the divine, which gives abundance to nature and abundance to human nature. Now, this then leads on to the question of supply. So if someone thinks that putting lots of gold in the ground is having a large supply of gold, or getting lots of paper money is having a large supply of paper money, that seems to not be correct. If you think of the Miller's story from the prior chapter, That very unkind neighbor said, well, why don't you put a stone in the ground and let it take the place of the gold? And I think of the story about Carl Jung as a boy of 8 or 9, sitting in the family garden. He sits on a large stone and he thinks, I am sitting on top of that stone and it is underneath me. But the stone could also have an eye, at least in Jung's fantasy. So it could be saying, I am lying here on this slope and he is sitting on top of me. And then Jung would struggle with the question of whether he was sitting on the stone or whether he was the stone on which he was sitting. Well, what we see is that the stone, of course, outlives the flesh, and it suggests spirit. The philosopher's stone facilitated transformation, including the transformation of matter by the infusion of spirit. So to sit on a stone is to meditate on something that will long outlast us and may introduce us to a realm where time is computed very differently, or maybe computed is totally the wrong word to use. So money reflects exchanges and lends itself to the belief that it is the source of well-being. And that belief leads to the worship of money. But to worship money places potential, abundance, outside of the person. The recognition of the divine abundance of nature and of our natures is lost. The supply really is not outside of us, although money might suggest that. It's within us. And in the infinite way, Joel Goldsmith expresses this well by saying, our consciousness is spiritual, infinite, and ever-present. This wealth is boundless, and unlike money or objects, it isn't increased by receiving. As Goldsmith elaborates, in spiritual truth, supply is not income, it is outgo. So the challenge is to open ways for that inner supply to escape into the world. One way to release that supply is by charitable activities, whether volunteering or giving financial support. It's to set money to a higher purpose. It's to move it beyond the commercial realm that it came from and try, in a sense, to reinvigorate it imaginatively by thinking of the exchanges with the divine for which we give thanks. Maimonides formulated a golden ladder of charity, which had 8 steps. The lowest step was to give with reluctance or regret, which is kind of like the hunters in the punishment of the stingy. They came back because they were afraid. The highest step is to enable a person to earn their own livelihood. And in between are a number of other steps in which the giver and recipient are in different relationships, but he tries to find the ideal relationship where neither party is known to the other, which takes ego out of it on both sides. Now, speaking of the infinite supply of consciousness brings me to inheritance. And inheritance it becomes more complicated when we think of it as the supply being inner abundance, because inheritance is, well, it's the money and property that people pass down to people they want to give it to. But actually, the words will and testament are both rooted in sexuality, and sexuality suggests fertility and the rituals connected to fertility and bring us to death, which is also a large part of inheritance. So taking inheritance in the largest sense, as everything received from generations before, it's easier to pass money down than to instill or give inner richness. And that's a real challenge. I want to give a sort of summary of a story from Grimm's fairy tales called The Spirit in the Bottle. In The Spirit in the Bottle, a woodcutter has saved his money to try and send his son to the university. And the son has gone to the university and done very well, but the father runs out of money and the boy has to come home. So the boy comes home, he's not resentful. He says to the father, I'll go and cut wood with you. The father says, oh, no, it's hard work. You don't have to do that. The boy says, no, I want to do it. And the father says, I only have one axe. The boy says, we could borrow the neighbor's axe. So they borrow the neighbor's axe and they go into the forest and they start cutting wood together. And at midday, the father says, let's rest. We'll take a break. And the son says, no, I don't want to rest. I want to go and look for birds' nests. So he goes on deeper into the forest with his eyes focused up above, looking for the birds' nests. And he comes to an enormous angry tree. It's a giant oak, so big that 5 men would have to outstretch their arms to get around its girth. And he's looking up because he thinks this tree probably has lots of birds' nests up in its branches. And he hears a voice saying, let me out, let me out. And then he has to look down in the roots of the tree. And there's a little frog-like creature in a bottle that's corked saying, let me out. So the boy thinks, well, I'll let him out. And he lets him out. And suddenly the little frog-like creature expands and becomes almost half as big as the oak tree itself, and says, what do you think your reward is going to be for letting me out of the bottle? The boy says, I had no idea. And the creature says, I'm going to break your neck. And the boy says, well, I don't want you to break my neck. So the spirit says, well, what you want doesn't matter. And the boy says, well, you're so large, I can't believe you ever fit in that bottle. Show me you can actually get in that bottle. So the spirit goes back in the bottle, the boy corks it, and he puts it down in the roots, and he's going to leave it there. And then the spirit says, let me out, I'll be good, and I'll give you good fortune. So the boy thinks, okay, I'll take a chance. And he uncorks the bottle, and the spirit comes out and tells the boy that its name is Mercurius. Mercurius being the Latin name of Mercury, or Hermes in the Greek, or in alchemy, again, the name of a Mercury-like figure. So he says to the boy, I'm going to give you this cloth. And he gives him a cloth that looks sort of like a bandage. And he says, if you touch a metal with this cloth, it will turn to silver. And if you touch a wound with this cloth, it will heal the wound. And the boy thanks him, and the spirit goes on his way. And the boy, thinking that he'll test this out, takes his axe, swings it at the huge oak, and breaks through the bark. Then he takes the cloth, touches where he's made a gash in the bark, and it immediately heals. So he goes back to find his father, and he doesn't tell the father about the encounter with Mercurius, but he just says to the father that he's kind of ready to go home. And the father says, no, they've got to work. They have to make money. They can't just stop in the middle of the day. So the boy thinks that if he touches the cloth to the blade of his axe, it will make the axe magical. And then he'll be able to cut a lot of wood, and they'll make a good amount of money. But when he touches the blade of the axe, it becomes silver. And when he strikes a tree with it, being a soft metal, it simply becomes deformed and it's of no use as an axe anymore. And the father is very angry. The father says, you've ruined my neighbor's axe, and now I'm going to have to pay him for it, and I don't have the money to pay him. And the boy says, well, I don't know my way out of the forest. Will you take me out? And the father doesn't want to. But finally, he relents, and he takes the boy out of the forest and says, take the axe to town and sell it so we can get some part of what we're going to owe the neighbor for it. And the boy does that. He goes to the local goldsmith, and the goldsmith says that it's worth 400 thalers because it's silver, thaler being the precursor to the dollar. But that he can only pay the boy 300 thalers now and another 100 thalers later. And the boy says, fine. He takes the 300 thalers back to his father, explains what happened with Mercurius. They go to the neighbor and give the neighbor double what the neighbor wants for the axe. The boy then gives his father 100 thalers, which is enough to keep the father comfortable for the rest of his life. And with the other money that remains, he's able to go back to the university, finish his education, become a doctor of renown, and with the help of the healing cloth, become a great healer. So it's interesting how sometimes we go looking up for spirit when we need to look in the roots of the family tree to see what we're really inheriting. The son respects the father, and in the end, the father loves the son. And this allows the father, even if he's angry because he thinks he's actually lost money, to lead the son out of the forest that the son doesn't know his way in and out of because he's not a woodcutter like the father. When Mercurius says, I'm going to break your neck, it's an interesting image because if you break the neck, you leave the head separated from the body. And in the head are the imagination and the spirit. And in the body are the heart and the instincts. So it's that separation that the boy manages to bridge by his interaction with Mercurius. And one of the images of Mercurius was a boy with wings imprisoned inside a bottle. And this is spirit in matter. And so the boy found a way to heal the family tree, and in doing so, bring a certain imaginal quality into his own life that allowed him to go beyond what had made the family tree angry, which was the failure to realize potential. His father saw the failure, but couldn't earn the sufficient money to allow the boy to get the university education. This was another way that the money was earned or made available. Now, it's interesting that debt has a strange relationship or peculiar relationship to inheritance. In both debt and inheritance, a person receives more assets than they had before. The inheritance comes from the expenditure of energy in the past by people who have now died. But debt is a statement about future energies of the debtor. So if the debtor is highly productive, the debt may lead to success. But if the debtor miscalculates or is simply borrowing to consume, the debt may be imprisoning. In 1822, Charles Dickens went through the city of London trying to raise money in any way he could, going to relatives and friends, because his father had run up a debt with a bakery shop and many other shops and was about to go to debtor's prison. But the boy of 10 couldn't raise sufficient funds, and his father went to prison and said before he went to his son that the sun had set on him forever. And Dickens wrote in his autobiography many years later of the secret agony of his heart that this had happened to his father and also to the family, because it meant that Dickens' dreams of being a learned gentleman would never be realized. Debtors' prisons are long gone. In 1898, we made liberal bankruptcy laws. But credit cards, which encourage borrowing and charge very high interest rates, are a leading form not only of debt today, but also of bank profits. And debt is like fire. It can be immensely useful or immensely destructive. So I think that the invisibility of debtors' prisons is the loss of a symbol that might have helped us in a way. I'm not saying we should bring debtors' prisons back, but I'm saying that if before I use my credit card, I thought about the debtor's prison, I might be less willing to use it. And it's been shown that people will spend more with credit cards than, for example, with debit cards or with money, with cash. And the estimates are from 15 to 85% more, quite large amounts. I want to tell a story from Africa called How Debt Came to the Ashanti. And I think it's good in a good illustration in several different ways. A hunter named Soko comes to the lands of the Ashanti. He has a debt that apparently he doesn't want to pay, so he's left his own village. But when the Ashanti hear that he has a debt, which is something they don't know what debt is, they've never heard of it, they're very worried and they don't want to simply allow him, they don't want him to be among them. So they say to him that he can only come to the lands of the Ashanti if he gets rid of his debt. But he has no idea how to get rid of it. So one day when Soko is making palm wine, the trickster god Anansi comes to Soko and says that all he has to do is say, whoever drinks my palm wine will take my debt. So Soko says that. And then Anansi says, then I will drink your palm wine, and he proceeds to drink it. So Anansi takes the debt of Soko. Then Anansi plants his fields, and he says, whoever eats my grain will take the debt. And a bird comes and eats the grain, eats some of the grain, and the bird takes the debt. And the bird flies back to its nest and lays eggs and says, whoever breaks my eggs will take the debt. And a branch falls from the tree and breaks the eggs, and the tree takes the debt. And the tree says, whoever eats my blossoms will take the debt. And a monkey eats the blossoms and takes the debt. The monkey says, whoever eats me will take the debt. And a lion eats the monkey and takes the debt. The lion then says, whoever eats me will take the debt. And one day the hunter Soko is out with his bow and arrow and sees the lion and shoots it through the heart and brings it back to the village where he shares the flesh with everyone. And that's how debt came to the Ashanti. So with the help of the hunter Soko and the trickster god Anansi. But what I think the story, well, okay, first of all, Soko is an interesting figure. He seems to come, we don't know where he comes from, but he certainly does feel like a scapegoat, someone who is carrying the collective sins of the society he has been cast out of. And he can't get rid of the debt because really it belongs to everybody. And that's what the story illustrates. We all have debt. And if not debt of money, we have existential debt. We have debt and gratitude for the very fact that we live, that we have been shaped into a form and that we do all the things that we do. We see in the story that debt, like money, also circulates. And if we can feel a debt for life and appreciation for our inner potentials, it certainly is an encouragement to give to others and to be charitable. So I want to just briefly go over a few more things. So one day I was out walking through downtown New York, and I went to look at the stock exchange, and I was really impressed that they had put the figure of Mercury in the pedimentary statuary above the facade of the exchange. So there it is. the wings on the helmet, unmistakably Mercury. So I called them up. I said, gee, it's really, you've got Mercury in this group of statues. And they said, oh, no, that's not Mercury. That is the figure of integrity, overseeing the works of man. So if you go down a little bit more, that's the figure, and it is a woman, I have to admit. And but what I thought was wonderful about Mercury, because Mercury is, well, the god of travelers. He can cross. He's the god of boundaries. He can cross from heaven to earth to the underworld. He's a psychopomp. He's the guide of souls. And he moves very quickly, which is why he has wings. So I thought that it would be wonderful that he, in his role as the god of commerce, also happens to be the god of thieves. And for the stock exchange to put the god of commerce and thieves on the statuary, I thought would be how amazing that is. But that wasn't what happened. This is integrity. So let's go take a quick look now at Mercury. It's integrity with agriculture and mining on her left, and science, industry, and invention on her right. And you can see from the small children, there is a fertility concept here as well. And here is Mercury. He's got the wings on his helmet too. And he has Heracles on one side, and so I'm forgetting who's on the other, but he protects travelers. That's why he has the helmet that he wears. And as I said, he guides us between the realms. So he would be an appropriate guide to find a reimagining of money from the world of commerce to the world of divine bounty. And finally, I wanted to end with what I think are a beautiful series of illustrations from Swiss banknotes. These banknotes were in circulation from 1957 to 1980, and they were the work of an artist named Pierre Gachot. So it starts with a fertility scene. They're picking the fruit and harvesting, and the woman is suckling an infant, and it's green. So it's the season of renewal and birth. And then it goes, this is in a bitter winter in 1322. Martin of Tours, a knight, comes across a starving man, and he cuts his cape in half so he can give half to the man who is exposed to the cold night. So it's a kind of paradigm image of charity. And then we have the image of rebirth. And since I would take this as the possibility of reimagining of spiritual rebirth. The old don't become young, the old die. But we're not in our spirits bounded by those rules. So it is possible to have the conception of the new, and this portrays that. Even the plant is blooming, and the animals on the right are much plumper than the dog on the left. And finally, we come to the dance of death. And here, the woman who perhaps suckled a child in the harvesting scene is now dancing with the caped figure of death. And the infant is carried by the skulled figure who has the sigh. But also here, we see an angel and an old man, and the angel has one hand on the third eye of the man while she seals his eyes closed, and her other hand is on his heart. And he sits on a rock, like the rock that Jung sat on. And beside the rock is a is a timer, and presumably his time has run out. But he has come through the cycles in a way that has transformed him with the help of this figure we now see to go on a journey that has the eternal quality of the stone instead of the temporal quality of the hourglass. So again, I would like to thank you so much for inviting me to share. It's been a pleasure. And I think Dana will now take over, and I will mute.
Well, thank you, Tad. I am struck by how out of the line of T.S. Eliot in Four Quartets that, you know, everything spins around desire. And if we can create desire in somebody for this, whatever it happens to be, and we have now a medium of exchange, which is almost more valuable to somebody than the thing that you're actually trying to exchange it for. And so people worship money, and they will do all kinds of crazy things to get it. If money had no value, Hollywood would be without a storyline. I mean, it's just crazy. So, Will, why don't you open us up and take us somewhere with this, and you know, let's have everybody join into a conversation on this.
I mean, firstly, thank you. That was amazing. I mean, I have reams of notes, more than, you know, a lot that I will take with me to keep processing. I'm especially struck by the circulation conversation. I think that's really paradigmatic to, you know, what's going on now, that shift in understanding, not just around money, but around our whole world, and it's expressing itself in the shifting in money. That's super interesting to me. I hope we can talk about that. And I'm also I hope we can, you know, maybe we can talk more about that story you told of Mercurius. I don't know if anybody recognizes that story. That's also the story of Willow the Wisp and Jack-o'-lantern. That is the story of basically bottling up the devil in the pocket with the money, and around the tree, and you trapping the devil in the tree. All those motifs show up there, and Willow the Wisp and Jack-o'-lantern. And the wisp is that little spark of light on that would sometimes come up on water, this weird little wisp of light on top of water that's associated with the light inside the jack-o'-lantern, and both of which are associated with the light inside of us, which is what that real mercurial energy is, maybe potentially inside the bottle, which is, I think, you know, maybe that spiritual value that's trying to be transmuted into money. So don't know where to go with that, but I'm going to be processing that story. I had no idea that the Mercurius story was connected to the Willow the Wisp. And so I would love to just hear from everybody and reserve some of my thoughts for later. Connie, I'm super curious to know if we can just crack this open with any shadow thoughts. For you, did you have anywhere you wanted to take this?
You know, the story that stayed with me, I really wasn't thinking of shadow, Will, although it's woven through, isn't it? It's woven in the greed and the accumulation and the hiding and the secrets and all that. But the story that kind of moved me most emotionally was the little boy on his horse. Was it a horse? Yeah. And the walls, the mother and the walls saying more money, more, until he died. And that seems to me like a metaphor for our culture, that, you know, it's become this God that we worship, and many people do give their lives for it. And then there's this contrast that I've kind of been tracking with this billionaire who's been systematically giving away her money. And I know that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett have this pledge to give away their money, but she is modeling the opposite of Midas and the greed and the hoarding. There are these constant announcements about where her billions of dollars are going in charitable giving. And I'm wondering how that's affecting people, or if it's affecting the collective at all. It seems to me like a counterpoint to this little boy's story.
Well, it seems to me that what she's doing is wonderful. But you shouldn't have to have $32 billion to do what she's doing. And you don't necessarily have to give money away to put things into a higher circulation. I mean, many people volunteer for charitable causes or just do good deeds. But certainly money is a form of energy, and it can be put to those purposes as well. So I don't know whether she's been taken as a model, but it would certainly be a bright spot these days to have someone whom I certainly respect her, and I think she's a writer, I believe.
She's a novelist. Mackenzie Scott. She's a novelist.
Yeah. So I just think it's admirable, but again, it's just to let whatever is good inside flow out. That's the way it increases. But it's wonderful that she's not hoarding it. There'd be no point to hoard $32 billion, but in any event, some people would.
I think of the mayor of Lake Town and Smog and Tolkien's recurring use of the hoarding of value there in The Hobbit and in Lord of the Rings, where at the same time, the mayor of Lake Town is hoarding all the wealth, the dragon is hoarding all the gold, and when the mountain erupts and all of the value starts to flow again, so does that wealth of Lake Town start to flow again in the city.
Yeah, well, you can't, if you're going to hoard it, then it will not be put to any human purpose, and it will not serve you, and it won't serve the community or the family. It just will be as the unsympathetic neighbor said, it wasn't a treasure at all. And you might as well put a stone in its place, because then you can meditate on your eternal, well, what is eternal?
Gosh, I remember when McCain wanted to recommend a spending freeze. Everything's collapsing. Stop the circulation. Hoard it quick. And it would have been a disaster. It would have been an absolute disaster. The solution to spending freeze, just stop the circulation. It's like, oh, the heart attack, quick, stop it all flowing.
Ted, I love your storytelling gift. And I was thinking, just as things opened up to us, the rich exchange of your offering us these wonderful stories from storyteller to listener, so the stories are recirculated. There's so much about the nature of storytelling and currency and value. And now we have a chance to maybe gift you or offer our insights as a way of gratitude to you for your storytelling. So that's one thing. Another is, as I kept listening to story after story, here are the pieces that started to gather for me. Myth, money, history, and transformation. And that's a quaternity of energy fields or forces. And then the last thing, and I would welcome any responses from you. You touched on it a little bit, but this, what seems to me to be a complex relationship between money and power. And those who have as their life purpose, be they politicians, theologians, whoever, have as their underlying drive to amass money that translates into power positions. And so I'm fascinated about the intimate relationship between money and power. So those are three observations, Tad, and any responses on any of those would be welcome.
Well, I appreciate your responses because, as you say, it makes a circulation of value going back and forth, which is a lovely thing. Not money value, but value. In terms of the thought of power and money, I mean, I think that the presentation and the book are an attempt to allow us to have an imaginal life that sees money in a different way from wanting to acquire and hoard it. I mean, it may be that in the course of living whatever life we have the potential to live, we'll have money, and then maybe we'll put it circulating to a higher purpose. But that's a different thing from not being willing to feed the women and children of the village, or Scrooge being unwilling to give a raise to his employee with a sick child. I mean, so I think that it is an individual process that I'm kind of suggesting here, a process of individuation and a deeper imagining of money and where it came from, as you say, a history going back well into prehistory. And what if we could feel that again? I got caught in a rainstorm today. What an experience. It was different from having an umbrella or being inside under a nice roof. It was very elemental and it was great. And, you know, our experiences of nature are very removed from us. We go to the supermarket and we order from Amazon. So it's a chance to try to understand in a way what we don't have anymore. But if we could give thanks to find the ways in which we can appreciate and give thanks. That's, I think, at the heart of it.
Yeah, beautiful response, Ted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Brian Muldoon. I had some responses, Tad. Great talk, very interesting. And one of my thoughts was about the idea of fiat currency. And fiat currency is just it is currency that is backed by the good faith of and having faith in the government. And in Latin, it actually comes from facere and means let it be done. And it's actually the subjunctive of let it be done. So fiat is the third person singular of the subjunctive, which means more like may it be done. So it's almost, I mean, it's the government that's giving the decree, but yet in letting say may it be done, it's the hypothetical, the subjunctive, and that leaves an opening for the gods, for the divine, that it may be done, it may not be done, but with the help of fate, chance, the gods, we hope that it will be done. So that was one thought. And those pictures, having grown up in Switzerland, and having spent many of those Swiss francs, those pictures of Pierre Gachot, very interesting and meaningful to me. Another thought was just about the baby boomers, of which we are all, sounds like we are all among them, going from kind of, to some extent, maybe not hoarding, but amassing some money for retirement, and then approaching retirement, and as going from role to soul, being willing to circulate that money that we have saved, and not feeling remiss about letting it go, which is an issue for me personally, as well as something that I see in the society and in people that I see. And another thought was just, I don't know if anybody's heard of Silvio Gasel. He was a German from the mid 19th century into the early 20th century, who had the idea of vegetable money, which would be a way of having money circulate. And he was actually, I mean, he was a bit of an oddball, and he was eventually supported particularly in this idea by John Kenneth Galbraith and by Irving Fisher, who were two renowned economists of the time, of the 30s. And his idea was that money should be stamped with an end date. So you get a $10 bill and you see it stamped with 2 years from now. You have 2 years to use that bill. If you don't spend it, invest it, buy a house, buy a car, something along those lines, something worthwhile, hopefully more worthwhile than a car, you would then, at the end of that 2 years, you would have to pay a fee to keep that money in circulation. So it would be a reversed interest. It would be a negative interest. So, and that has gained some support among economists, particularly in times of recession, when people are holding money back. So in any case, definitely a lot of food for thought, and thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brian. I love the idea of vegetable money, which I hadn't heard of before. And I can just imagine, the images that could appear on that money of things that we once gave thanks to the divine for and had rituals and prayers and sacrificed in return to make sure that we would get more of whatever those vegetables are. And likewise with the fiat money, I mean, it is interesting that our dollar bill says "In God We Trust" on the back, and that phrase came into our money during the Civil War, and in 1957, the law was passed that made it a requirement to be on all of our money. So it is sort of like it's fiat money, but we would like people to feel that somehow it's got the authority of those early heads of Demeter and Persephone. Well, the money has vegetative motifs, that it's green. There are all sorts of suggestions there of the vegetative world from which the earliest exchanges took place. So as for the people nearing retirement, that is a sea change to have to think of not accumulating, but releasing. And in that is like the last image, the image of death dancing with the maiden. In that is an admission of mortality, that no matter how much money we have, we're not going to live forever. And it's a beautiful thing that a woman with $32 billion can give it away. She doesn't really want to live forever. I don't know how much she'll give away, but same thing with William Gates and Warren Buffett. This idea of setting money to a higher purpose. So, and in the individual sphere, of living a full life while one can with the money that one has accumulated, not burying it in a field or in a, a bank account or whatever. So, okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you for those wonderful stories. That we need those and many, many more encyclopedias of those stories to find then the way inwardly into each of them where mythic imagination would bloom. Myth, true myth, not mythologies. Myth is different than mythologies. Myth, like Eliade says, myth is something that never happened, but is always happening. And the collection of stories give you that feeling of, oh, look, this is always happening. And they were also beautiful stories that seemed to me to be the stories of the soul of the world. Completely, but that then leads me to this conundrum question, because it seems to me that capitalism really, really damages the beauty of the wholeness of the care of the earth stories that you speak. And it raises the greatest challenge is actually the challenge to psychology. Psychology has to be the answer, but it doesn't know how to do it yet. Because that capitalism, even the word capitalism, that has resonances of cattle, and it goes way back into the original stories. But capitalism really begins with Martin Luther. And his dear friend and theologian Melanchthon. And Melanchthon also is the first person to give the word psychology. And in giving the word psychology, he takes the soul away from the world and makes it the realm of subjectivity, the science of subjectivity. Well, you have that view of man as only two parts, cognition and feelings and emotion. And that was to be the study of psychology. But that's the end of the soul of the world. So you see, that is what we have to somehow work to return. But that should be the challenge of psychology. We're the ones that, even though we talk about, the soul of the world and Sophia, but that's not the same as going out in the world and everything is immediately felt as the intertwining of divine and earthly, everything. And money, I wanted to ask about when the dollar bill, it does say, in God we trust. Doesn't it also say the new secular order? See the terrible tension, the new secular order, in God we trust. How can that be? How can that be? So that's my question is and I think we have to do it by finding, by entering into mythic imagination through the stories you tell, because myth tells it all. We won't. If we were successful, if psychology takes that on, how can we return soul to the world? It's like saying, how can we come to the end of our profession? which is a great work to think. If we were successful, we wouldn't exist. But the wholeness of the world would.
Well, it seems to me that the challenge is not only through psychology, but education in general. I'm thinking of how Sam Keen made this archetypal tension between a person's authenticity to do whatever it was that is their calling, as contrasted with what they are going to receive in life in terms of money or goal setting or remuneration or what have you. The one that you feed is going to take precedence over the other. So if money becomes important, then what you do to achieve the money is secondary. But if who you are and your own authenticity or your calling or finding the soul of the world, the money becomes secondary to it. And once you find that calling, once you align yourself with a passion, as Joseph Campbell would say, the rest of it falls into place, because you can have enough of something that you don't need. It's when you don't have enough or you feel that sense of lacking that you can never have enough. And that's the dilemma that we've been sold. When we see the image that we have of ourselves writ on billboards and in movies and in television, but not within our own internal engagement within our own lives, money will never satisfy that. And so it's like that story of the white wolf and the dark wolf. Whichever wolf you feed is the one that's going to govern your life.
Yeah. Except, for example, I mean, Adam Smith has a psychology that's of acquisition that says it's innate for human beings to acquire. So that's, I mean, you see, let me ask you this. Seems to me that the question is, when Melanchthon establishes psychology, and it's a very narrow psychology, and particularly my question of his psychology is, where is spirit? Where is spirit? That becomes money. That becomes money. And but because it becomes money, but is forgotten in the soul, we can individually try to live in the manner that you were saying, Dana. But the collective realm is this difficulty of spirit is materialized totally, become a materialistic world.
That's what I think is so profound about the speaking walls, because what specifically is it that's saying it's not enough? The walls. The walls are the part of us that enclose us, that represent that we are closed off. You cannot accumulate without walls. Walls are the boundary that defines the accumulation. And the reason why it's the mother's voice is, if we go back to Greece, it was the stores of the house had the same word for the genitals or the womb of a mother and the stores of a house. So the theft of Helen is also an allegory for the stealing of all the stuff from the stores of the house. So the walls of the house representing the body, the vessel, the mortal material form that needs to accumulate and lives within the paradigm of accumulation. And so this is also, by the way, part of marginalization of femininity, because then we associate the feminine with the vessel and the materiality and the fallen and all that stuff. So caveat there, problematic issue in the fact that it's feminine and all that stuff. But that's the symbol system. That's what's being, I think, shown here, is that it is the materialistic mortal container that needs to accumulate and never sees anything as enough. And it's that paradigm, I think, that we have to challenge.
You know, Robert mentioned capitalism, and I know that this the approach of my book is really for individuals to seek something different from the prevailing collective, and that may or may not amount to very much in the long run, but at least it opens a door, and Hermes can lead people on if they're willing to go through the door and encounter the different levels of their existence and understand the interplay of spirit and matter. So it's a huge challenge. And I mean, I have been having the fantasy lately of, what if instead of mining digital currency and polluting and trying to make money by complex computing, all of that electricity, all of those computers and all of those brains were focused on solving a problem like global warming. What might that do? And why is it that money is the thing that they are focused on mining? And it's a money that seems kind of difficult to wholeheartedly endorse. For example, there are 19 million Bitcoin, but of those 19 million, apparently 3 to 4 million have been lost, either because people can't remember their passwords or their wallets have been lost. Now, it's just kind of hard to understand why you would think something that fluctuates so much in value would be of use as a currency, or why the world actually needs another currency. Now, I know that there are advocates for it, but I just wish that it had been focused on a different problem. And maybe the fact that the focus is that way shows the power of money and the need for people to re-envision how they relate to money and what money could be in a society.
There's some connection here to the climate crisis that you just mentioned, in the sense that oil is our gold, and it's being seen symbolically. It has been seen symbolically as kind of, what's running the world. And it's becoming evident from the war in Ukraine that fossil fuels, that the banks are funding fossil fuels. It's not just Russia and the geopolitical situation. It's our institutional setup of capitalism is funding fossil fuels. And so oil now has become the enemy. That form of money is shifting in the public eye, I think. And so what does that mean for the soul of the world, as you call it, Robert? What does that mean for the, because one of the ways that we've disconnected from the natural world and the animal world and the trees and everything is by pulling out the resources and using them up and looking and objectifying them. What does it mean now that so many people are seeing, I want to say, the evil of fossil fuels in relation to the symbolism of money that we're talking about and the stories that we build around it and our relationship to the natural world?
Electricity is far more dangerous. The electronic world of total control. In fact, that's what maybe Tad can say something about this. You mentioned, but when you get to credit cards now, that's total abstraction from the world. Then it's going to digital currency. The world is gone. It's only a matter of who now is in control. And it has nothing to do with the earth. Oh, that. Yeah, maybe this. I always felt that, and that money, the origins of money, were sacrifices to Mother Earth. The sacrifice of the bulls, and that were distributed in equal proportion to everybody at the ritual, but always something was left. The surplus was left to be returned to Mother Earth. And you follow that through, then wheat becomes the standard, because the grains of wheat are all pretty much the same size. But that's still earth and it's feminine. When we get to gold, it turns masculine. So that's the other dimension of present money, that it is excessively masculine. I ask more of a question than a declaration that I seem to make.
Well, I mean, I certainly think that we are very, very far from what people once gave thanks to. And I said before, we're simply removed from it. It may not even be that we don't want to give thanks. We just don't know what to give thanks for. The cut of meat in the supermarket doesn't have much to do with the bull. That was worshipped all across the Mediterranean and in other parts of the world. So, and then that goes on. And then when you get, you have money backed by gold. I mean, the big issue of the elections of 1896 and 1900, would money be backed only by gold, or would it also be backed by gold and silver? And the idea that the Wizard of Oz, Oz being OZ or ounces, what gold and silver are measured in, was a monetary allegory, and that in fact, when Dorothy gets to the land of Oz, she's wearing silver slippers. So she's sort of a proponent of silver. They go on the Golden Road to the Emerald City, where the guy running the whole show turns out to be a humbug, but they want him to sort of grant their wishes anyway, without seeing that they have become, by going on the journey, what they've gotten what they wanted. They have courage, they have brains, they have heart. So it's just harder and harder to kind of, as things get more abstracted, it's harder to see this. So there's no more gold, there's no more silver, there's just Federal Reserve notes. And then suddenly you have credit cards. And then beyond credit cards, you have digital currency. I think digital currency is even worse than credit cards, and credit cards are bad enough. Credit cards charge 20% interest on overdue balances, and they encourage you to make a minimum payment, as if you were, you're a citizen in good standing if you make your minimum payment, because you're going to pay them a lot of interest. And they have a word for people who pay the full balance every month. They're called free riders, those bad people who don't contribute interest to the banks. And credit cards account for a quarter of the bank profits. So in digital currency, it becomes even harder. There's not even a plastic card. You just got this this abstraction, really. It's a ledger somewhere, and it's held together by blockchains on computers that give verification of, yes, such and such a thing actually happened. But it's so removed from nature that in a world with that kind of currency, you just wonder, how much thanks can we give for nature? How much thanks will be available? So it's the challenge to each of us to have that vision and to give the thanks that we can give, and then realize the supply we have that needs a release out into the world to circulate to good purpose.
What I had noticed, by the way, sorry, Dennis, and one thing,
Please.
just on this particular thing, the dematerialization of money is something I've been fascinated by for a decade. And one of the pieces, like, yes, we lose the feminine and the earth and those things, but at the same time, as we dematerialize, the paradigm repeats itself: atoms, gold, ego. So when you see inherent value is your foundational premise, value is inherent, then you project the inherence of value onto the self, and you end up with an inherent ego. When you see value as interrelational, and when our money is an expression of value, and now our money has gone from something that has inherent value to something that is interrelational, then the very medium of money has shifted from a structure of hoarding and limitation to a structure of interconnectivity. And when we get to investment, now I don't hoard money. Now, if I do have money to put into an investment, that money flows everywhere while sitting in the bank. So I do think that there are real problems with the dematerialization of money and the loss of the femininity in money and the loss of the earth. At the same time, it is also conditioning us to get over our perspective of everything is inherently valuable, which reinforces the ego and greed.
Yeah.
Well, I think that relying on gold or silver was a questionable idea. You could rely on any commodity, certainly wheat or anything else. In the end, money has value because we trust it. And that means in a way that we trust each other and we trust the government it came from. And if that trust is damaged, the money will have no value whatsoever. But that's a different issue from trying to find a circulation within ourselves and to others that re-envisions the connection of money to the divine and also then allows us to be thankful and giving.
Yes. And I just want to push this maybe a half step further because underneath all of what we're speaking about, I'm not sure if it's underneath, it may be on either side of it, is the nature of counterfeiting itself. One of the ways I like to think about myths is that they are shaped or constructed by an infrastructure of beliefs. Now, if a shared sense of what to believe is present, I think of people move in one direction. But if beliefs resting on facts are counterfeited so that one reaches a point where one is confused about what to believe and what to believe about reality itself. See, my sense of this metaphor of the counterfeiting of reality today is part of this conversation that's taking its shapes and the particularities of disconnect, of alienation, of a piece of plastic that has immense power and immense destructive power at the same time. So there's something deep about the imagination of counterfeiting itself that is part of our conversation.
Dennis, it just seems to me, going down the path of counterfeiting, that we think these dependencies that we have formed with the world to believe in something outside of ourselves are not authentic. They're not real. They're just simply manufactured through which we think that some device, some program, something that we do to ourselves will in some way heal ourselves or make us real. And people sacrifice entire lives and careers in chasing money and trying to do these moneyed professions. It's without that, without being sold that bill of goods within the educational system, students wouldn't go off manufacturing degrees and things that have no possibility of authenticating themselves.
Okay.
It's just the nature of an enterprise to be self-fulfilling. And we are the food. If we give ourselves over to that by subscribing to that program, we can end up, to go down even further, it's a collusion between big pharma, corporations, the government, and all of this kind of thing to keep people medicated in their jobs at a level of performance so that the bottom line can be realized. And the human individual in that becomes secondary to the output. And when they're no longer useful, they're either phased out, let go, or transferred, or what have you. The soul of the world is the price we pay for having a compromise, and it starts at the earliest possible levels.
Yeah, that's good, Dana. Good.
I wonder very much along these lines. I was going to say, see, money is a verb being treated as a noun. and that also, counterfeiting is taking verbs and making them into nouns. So begin to think of money as, well, like Ezra Pound did. If money's a verb, then it's also poetry, and then we have a whole different imagining.
Right. Well, a currency comes from the Latin currens, which means to flow. So it is a verb. And to make it a noun means you're going to bury it like a stone.
Yeah. Is it that, I also heard all your stories as equally being stories of the economics. I mean, read the true meaning of economics, care of the household, the word economics means. So every one of your stories are care of the household.
And they're also based upon shortages and deficiencies. If we are whole from the beginning and we mirror ourselves in relation to existence and the earth as we've been raised, and we can find and realize our wholeness in relationship to that and worship that, we'll go back and have these gods, and we'll find gods that are sustainable.
Before we wrap up, Dana, I just want to mention a couple of the things that I wish we could have gotten to tonight that are really relevant to our world. One, sanctions. And in the context of all of this, what is a sanction really? So a question to go away with. And then the other is that my brothers and dad, they'll just crush me if I get through this whole talk without bringing up this one thing for us to think about. There's been a shift from the idea of maximizing shareholder value to maximizing stakeholder value. And you've seen 100 leading CEOs. I had a chance to talk with Hubert Joly, who's the faculty member at Harvard Business School, but also is CEO of Best Buy for a long time. And he said that when he shifted from optimizing shareholder value to optimizing stakeholder value to optimizing for the employees and the customer and everyone, that's when Best Buy saw its shareholder value go up the most. So this is a promising paradigm shift, or something we can be hopeful for. And I wish we would have got a chance to talk about that tonight as a potential shift.
Well, maybe we can get Tad back again sometime and do a part 2 of this. It's a hot button in so many different fronts. There's just and where's James Hillman when we really need him? I mean, he makes things that seem like gerunds and nouns, verbs. They come to life. He plants the seeds in the minds and they grow. So I want to just slow it down, just chill for a second, because we have reached the bewitching hour. We need to kind of feel this energy and go out into our lives this evening. I thank you very much, Tad, for staying with us on the East Coast, and you too, Brian. Now, Robert, you're down in Texas with Dennis, so you're not that far ahead into the time zones, but I really appreciate when East Coasters come on here, and I know it's up past your bedtime, and although the places stay open, I think it's great. I think it's great, Will. So let me do a quick singing bowl, and let's have a moment of silence. Again, let's not rip our world apart. Let's find ways to heal and provide wholeness and honor one another. Let's not be angry and hostile with one another. I don't get this. So my thoughts are with all of the areas of our existence that are really in turmoil right now. So thank you, people.
Good night, everyone.
I love you all.
Good night, all.
Thank you all.
Robert.
Thanks
you,
very
Brian.
much.
Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Connie.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Connie.
Dennis.
Good luck with the
Wonderful.
book, Ted.
Really awesome
Thank
one.
you.
Yeah,
All
Thanks.
right.
Thank you, Ted.
Thanks,
wonderful
Dana and
evening.
Will.
Brian.